Wendy, today we're going to focus on how mental fitness practices can help us with managing stress. Let's introduce ourselves. I'm Lisa Brewer, a leadership coach with Lisa Brewer Coaching. I help my clients to clarify their goals and then develop and implement plans which advance their career and grow their confidence, their courage, and their joy.
And I'm Wendy McManus, a leadership coach with Connect to Potential. And I draw out the true genius in my clients so they become more confident, capable leaders who create stellar results. And Lisa, we've been talking about this topic. It's managing stress today, and it's such an important topic. It's one that my clients bring to coaching all the time. It's universal and it comes in so many forms, like the physical stress from an injury or an illness, or the emotional stress in the form of grief after a loss. It could be the overwhelm from juggling so many things, or the stress from how we perceive our situation.
It's funny that you bring up how perception impacts stress. I recently heard of a thought experiment from Michael Neal, and I found it so powerful. So imagine that you're walking along a deserted street and you find $100 bill lying on the ground. What would the money mean to you? Now, take that same situation, but imagine that you live in poverty. What would the money mean to you in that situation? Now, finally, same situation, but you're a multimillionaire. Now, what would the money mean to you?
Lisa, that's so fascinating. I had such different reactions to that $100, even though its objective value never changed. It's a great example of how our perspective shapes our reality. So, how do you see this relating to our topic today of managing stress?
Well, as we look at the circumstances of our lives, our workload, our challenging customer, the lot in life that we have, they can all be viewed from a variety of perspectives. For example, if we look at them from the perspective of 10 years from now, what would be important about them?
Yeah, now I see where you're going. You're doing a little bit of time traveling, right? If we could look back on today's stressful situation from the end of our lives, would it be worth all the negative emotion that we wrap around it? Another perspective I like to consider is, is today's stress looking at it through the lens of our core values? Is our response to this situation aligned with what's most important to us right now?
Exactly. These techniques are so helpful because our brains are hardwired to focus on the negative to keep us alive and out of danger. So, since we're on thought experiments, imagine that we're out on the Serengeti, enjoying the sunshine and watching the elephants at the watering hole. We see the tall grasses moving nearby. Maybe it's the wind, or maybe it's a tiger. If we take the time to figure out, we could become the tiger's next meal. So, to protect us, our brains are conditioned to see the worst case scenario first so that we'll get off our butts and run. There's no time for reasoning and creativity, so our brains tend to shut down those functions under stress.
Well, fortunately, most of us don't have to worry about dangers as immediate as being eaten by a tiger, but our brains are still on high alert. Every time that the brain spots a danger, whether that's a crazy driver or somebody making a callous remark, or we're facing a tight deadline or a scary news story, the fight, flight, or freeze stress response kicks in and the stress hormone cortisol is released. Now, this causes us to operate on impulse so we can dodge the threat. But then it takes time for the brain to come back to that place where we can be more creative problem solvers. If these perceived threats are spaced out, then we have time to recover in between. But if they aren't, like during a pandemic or a crisis at work or at home, our cortisol levels and our stress levels remain so high.
It's so true. And the reality is that most of the challenges that we face don't require that rush of hormones. In fact, we could be so much more effective if we could avoid that stress response and deal with the problem using a SAGE approach, which gives us access to empathy, curiosity, innovation, purpose, and inspired action.
Which is where mental fitness comes into play. As we build our mental fitness, we can avoid the stress response more often. And when we do fall prey to those stress hormones, we can recover faster, even from the most challenging situations. The mental fitness training programs that each of us offer provide a proven, reliable method to build your mental fitness. But there are some steps that you can start taking right now. So, first, when you feel yourself getting stressed, take a moment, take a pause, and take 3 slow, deep breaths, mindful breaths. Now, this starts to quiet the stress response. Then, using your saboteur interceptor muscle that we've learned about in a previous episode, you talk to the judge. That judge saboteur in your head that's trying to, send up the alarm. You say, "Thanks for the warning, judge, but I've got this. You can show yourself to the door now. I don't need you right now." Then take a few minutes to exercise your self command muscle by focusing on one physical sensation and letting go of your thoughts. Now, Lisa, it's been a while, so I wonder if you would guide us through a few moments of the self command exercises and show us how that's done.
Sure. And maybe we'll just start out with those 3 slow breaths that you were mentioning.
Yeah,
So
I
I
love that.
invite you to close your eyes and take a nice deep inhale and a long, slow exhale. Another deep inhale and a slow exhale. One more deep inhale and a slow exhale. Now take a moment and notice the sensation of your body where it hits the chair, the pressure points, the different contact points. Focus in a laser focused way on what it feels like. What are the sensations? And as thoughts come, just let them go and refocus on the physical sensation. Now notice the sensations in your legs, where your legs are hitting the chair, the feel of your clothing on your legs, any air moving on your legs. Now move your laser focused attention to your feet. Notice all the sensations of your feet, the pressure of where they're hitting the floor. Do you notice any tingling sensations or any other sensations in your feet? And as thoughts enter your mind, just let them go and refocus on your feet. Now see how many of your toes you can notice. If you need to wiggle them a little, wiggle them to see how many toes you can find. And now place one hand on your stomach and notice the rising and falling of your stomach with every breath. Really pay attention to all those sensations. What is the feeling of your clothing against your hand? Is it moving, and how does that feel? Now, one more deep breath. And a slow exhale. And when you're ready, open your eyes and let's come back together.
Lisa, that was fantastic. These exercises are so powerful. I feel much more centered now, which is the goal. And when we feel centered, it's much easier to access and use that sage muscle. So, just to recap the steps that we went through, first, we recognized that we were stressed. We took a few deep breaths. In our minds, in our thoughts, we sent the judge away. We did these self-command exercises. Next, we can bring in the sage by asking this key question: how could this situation be converted into a gift or opportunity? What might I learn? What strength could I develop? What inspiration can I take from this situation? Now, it might seem like all of this takes too long in the heat of the moment when you're under stress, but with practice, you'll find that you can do this really quickly.
That's true. And so I've seen this at work in my own life recently. I'm collaborating with some other professionals in Santa Fe to provide an integrated wellness program. And we've been working on this for months when all of a sudden the judge saboteur got very worried about how are we going to handle confidentiality. So I took a few deep breaths. I sent the judge to the door. I took a few more deep breaths. And then my sage saw the opportunity to expand my knowledge of ethics and integrated practices. So I asked the other professionals, how have you handled confidentiality when you're partnering? And they weren't concerned because they had done this before. So my judge poked its head back in. So I again refocused on my breathing. And one of the professionals offered that his network had some protocols and he could reach out to them to find out what they were. That made me realize I've got networks that I could reach out to. This helped me to activate the sage and have the sage start getting very curious. And so now I'm actually excited to understand how HIPAA forms and coaching contracts can be used together to protect client confidentiality and to clearly articulate what information will be shared, when, how, with whom, with the real goal of maximizing client outcomes.
Lisa, this process must be really effective if you are getting excited about contracts and HIPAA forms. That's all I have to say. But as we've said before, it's easier to do this when all three of the mental fitness muscles have been strengthened, right? This is where our training programs come in. If you've been listening to our conversations, you probably understand in your head the basics of how to do this work. However, you know that you don't just study how to do a sit-up in order to get six-pack abs. Likewise, mental fitness doesn't grow without regular practice. It's very similar. Our mental fitness programs help you develop the habits of exercising these muscles so they not only become stronger, but they become part of your routine. They become habits.
Yeah, I'm glad that you mentioned that because that routine, those habits are so important, especially when it comes to managing stress. When this becomes a practice, when it becomes habitual, then you start catching the triggers sooner and sooner so that you can recover to centeredness faster and faster.
It's so true. And with that, Lisa, I think we should wrap this one up. We'd love to get into conversation with all of you about this. You can reach Lisa through lisabrewercoaching.com.
and you can contact Wendy through connecttopotential.com. Until next time, we wish you all a low stress week.